Okay, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for joining us online and in person to our research workshop. My name is Dr. Catherine McCallan. I'm the director of the Center for Latin American Arts and an associate professor in the School of Art and Design. And I'm really honored to have colleagues from multiple disciplines here today to welcome Dr. Nadine Hubbs from the University of Michigan. Dr. Hubbs is a professor of gender and women's studies and also a music scholar, a musicologist. And we're honored to have her here today. And this event is a collaboration with the Center for Mexican American Studies and Gender and Women's Studies at UTRGV. And we're honored that the Ray Charitable Trust and the Raul Tijerina Foundation grant that we wrote with colleagues here at the Center for Latin American Arts helped fund generously Dean Hubbs' visit. Today, we're having a research workshop, and it's titled Sounding Mexican American Life, Music, and Art. And we're honored to have Dr. Hubbs lead it. And we have two colleagues from UTRGV, Dr. Christen Garcia from the School of Art and Design, and Dr. Teresita Lozano from the School of Music, joining us in this roundtable today. And this is a two-day event in Dean Hubbs' one-week residency here at UTRGV in the Rio Grande Valley. She has been here before for research and supported also by the Center for Mexican American Studies. So we're honored to have this continuity with her and that she's returning and continuing her research and encouraging you all to be a part of it. There is a link on the information about these lectures with a web form for you to fill out if you would like to share some of your own research and your own ideas. And it goes directly to Dean Hubbs and the Center for Latin American Arts so that you can continue to be in a dialogue with her and us and all of our colleagues, even after she has to depart and all this week. So we're honored to have this dialogue that will be ongoing. And I would also like to remind everyone that tomorrow we have more events where we welcome student and community bands to join us to play at 4:00 tomorrow downstairs by the entrance to the library by the cafe. And the Texas Sweethearts Band are coming to play, and we're honored to have them tomorrow. And then Dr. Hubbs will be giving her formal lecture, Country Music as Mexican American Music, tomorrow at 6:00. So we hope you can join us for all these great events. And without further ado, I will introduce Dr. Hubbs. She is a musicologist, historian, and gender and sexuality specialist. Her scholarship and frequent media work treats subjects from queer classical composers to sexuality, race, and class in popular music, including Morrissey, disco, Radiohead, and Springsteen. On the subject of country music, Dr. Hubbs has authored a book, Rednecks, Queers, and Country Music, co-edited the Uncharted Country Essay Collection, featured in the Dolly Parton's America podcast, and is currently researching a new book, Border Country, Mexico, America, and Country Music. And Dean also teaches women's and gender studies, music, and American culture at the University of Michigan. And we're excited for her to lead this research roundtable to help us think about defining research, how do different disciplines in the fine arts collaborate and also come together for new ideas and new publications and research agendas? How can we include our own unique and creative voice in our research? And also to remember that research is a collaborative effort. So we look forward to hearing Dr. Hubbs' brief talk and slides, and then we will continue on with our roundtable. So thank you, Dr. Hubbs.
Thank you so much, Dr. McAllen. Catherine. Yeah, research can be a collaborative effort. This was the last thing that Catherine just mentioned. Research can be a collaborative effort, and that can be really fun. Research can also be lonely, and some of you may be familiar with sort of lonely archival pursuits. First thing I wanted to mention, I don't know about you, some of you are probably first generation students. I was a first gen student too. And when people talked about research, it sounded like something kind of foreign to me. And so I just wanted to start by saying that you're all researchers. You already are researchers. Whether you know it or not, we all do these things every day. We do things like consumer research where you're about to make a big purchase or maybe even a small purchase. And so you check prices, you check places where you can buy the thing, you check reviews to see which one you should choose, right? We all do that form of research. Pre-travel research, if you know you have a vacation coming up and you want to obsess over it while you're putting in your shift, your time on the shift, you might read up on possible destinations. You might learn about their history. You might learn about their geographic features as well. You know, are there mountains there? Are there places to go to the beach? Et cetera, right? Healthcare research. It could be for yourself. It could be for a pet. My dog just ate this mushroom. Do I need to be scared? You know, it's 2 a.m. Do I need to take them to the really expensive emergency vet? Or about ourselves and our family members. We may do health care research. So I wanted to ask you guys first, what other kinds of everyday research do you do? What do you think of when you think of everyday research? Are there others that I've left out? You do research, you research history online? Yeah. You're taking how many history classes? 3 right now? Three different. That's a lot of history classes in one semester. And that gets us into, well, you may be kind of researching those history classes as a sort of consumer of courses, or you may be doing research for your assignments in the history class. So in one case, there's like, you're researching history. We think of that as kind of official academic research, and the other kind as consumer research, but there are places where they might come together too, right? So we could ask the question, you know, what's the aim of all these kinds of everyday research? Can anybody characterize? What's our goal? What's the aim when we do these kinds of research?
Solve a problem.
Yeah. That's a great answer. Let's go on to the next slide. So now to talk about a more specific kind of research. Here's an example of a type of digital research that you all have probably heard of called internet sleuthing, right? Have you all heard of internet sleuthing? So this is an internet sleuth whose name is Destiny Stark. And I learned about her work as a country scholar. I learned about her work when she did a deep dive into the song that became a big deal about 2.5 months ago. The country song Jason Aldean posted called Try That in a Small Town. I ended up writing an op-ed for MSNBC. Got a lot of hate mail. And my op-ed was, I thought, pretty vanilla. But Destiny Stark, she does not play. She did a deep dive. I love her motto. I'm petty and I'm curious, and I have access to the internet. So she has TikTok and Instagram accounts, and she's an activist and a kind of librarian who does deep research. Often it's archival. You see, archives we think of as documents that we can use for research purposes. The documents are often written documents, but they can also be photographic and other kinds of documents. And she found stuff that became nationally known. I mentioned it in my MSNBC op-ed piece. And then she was on national TV after this because she dug up old photos, for example, about the 1946 race riot in the town where they shot the video. And Jason Aldean had posted on Twitter, now known as X, saying, oh no, it had nothing to do with racism. And we didn't know there was a lynching at the courthouse where we filmed this. We didn't know nothing about nothing. And here she shows lots and lots of photos and then close-ups from his video. And it was undeniable at some point because of her internet sleuthing. So what's the aim of this research? She uses all that research to do what? You know, it's one thing to do the research. She could do it in the privacy of her own bedroom, right? So she takes extra steps beyond that. So what is her goal? What's the ultimate result of her research?
Sharing it to the internet, sharing to the others.
Sharing it, that's right, exactly. And through sharing, she is making her case. She's making an argument with it. And she is, well, we could say educating. She's making a lot of people mad. And her hate mail was so much worse than mine. Let's go to the next slide. So now we get a little closer to the kind of thing that we typically think of as academic research. She's doing historical research. She's doing archival research. But all of her research is digital. She never visits a different library or an archive or a deposit, right? She finds everything that she uses. As she says, I'm petty, I'm curious, and I have access to the internet, and that's how she does her work. So you can do that for academic research as well. Undergraduates, graduate students, faculty members can do archival research on the internet. We can also go visit libraries and archives and museums and places where documents are held, photographic documents, and so on. So does anyone recognize this scene? It's 10th Street in McAllen. And the last time I was here in the before times, a couple of years before the pandemic, I brought my chilly little Michigan self down here at the end of July. And every single day I was here about a week. It was triple digits every day. And I was staying in La Quinta Hotel across from this, and I thought that was actually a beautiful scene. So when I was researching then my new book, the book I'm still researching now, Border Country, I did field work, and I'll talk about in the next slide. And I did archival research, and I was looking for specific things. I wanted to find the historical roots of country music in Mexican and oops, I went over the palm tree and I can't read it now. Mexican and Mexican American sources. Because no work has shown that yet. So in the music, that's one place I'm looking for it. Do I know whether I'm going to find it there at first? I don't. I'm doing this research with some hunches, and I talk to people who might be able to make suggestions to me. Have you checked out corrido? I'm like, I'm going to check out corrido. What about the grito? Yeah, those, that you sometimes hear, especially in older country songs. People point out to me, that probably comes from, Mexican music. The guitar, of course, came from Spain to the New World, and came up from Mexico to the United States. And then when I was here doing field work with here in the Center for Mexican American Studies, I met with focus groups, and they were all students who had just graduated from UTRGV within the past few years. They were in their 20s. And they said to me, they were all country fans. One of the things that really connects for us is rancho, and how it connects to the lifestyle, it connects to the clothing, it connects the videos and the lyrics and the music for us. So no visit to McAllen for my research purposes would be complete without going to Hillbillies. I went on student night. And so I learned all kinds of things. I hung out with the participants on the scene, right? So that's a form of research. I'm talking now about research methods. Participant observation in this case. I'm participating and I'm observing. I'm trying not to let people see that I'm taking notes on my phone, right? Because like, what is that person doing in the dance club, like taking notes on us? But hanging out with scene participants because I'm a musicologist, because this is a music topic, listening to the music is part of the research. Dancing can be part of the research, noting what kind of dancing are people doing, which line dances are they doing, how do people figure out who they're going to two-step with? So that's part of the sociality of the scene. I noted styles of dress. There were all the men were wearing those fishing shirts. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Where the sleeves roll up and then they fasten. Yeah. And there's a vent in the back. So I was noting all that. I had not seen those in Michigan. So what is the aim of this kind of research? My archival research, my participant observation, my focus groups, which is another method. What's the aim of that? Well, let's go to the next slide. It's my last slide. The aim of all that is, again, as you said, sharing. I'm going to share the information that I find. I want to educate the field. I want to tell them, whether the field of country music studies is hip to this yet or not, there are a whole bunch of Mexican-American country music lovers. And I hope I can also find there's a history to country music that comes from Mexico and Mexican Americans. And I can certainly trace it back to Johnny Rodriguez and Freddie Fender and people like that, but I would love to trace it back even earlier than the 1970s, because country music's been around for 100 years as a commercial music form. So I hope that you guys will help me continue my research by filling out the web form that Dr. McAllen mentioned. And I think you're going to get the link for it, right? So I want to turn this over now to Christen.
I want to thank Dr. McAllen for spending the last however many months planning this event. So thank you for your time, and it's great to meet you, Dr. Hubbs. And it's nice to formally meet you.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and Dr. Garcia is going to speak now. Originally from the San Diego-Tijuana borderlands, Garcia's visual and written work is informed by Latina, Latinx, Chicana, Chicanx, and Borderlands series. She's the co-founder of the Nationwide Museum Mascot Project and has performed at over 40 art museums and galleries, including the Museo de Arte Contemporáneo in Lima, Museo Jumex, Mexico City, the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, the Hammer Museum in LA, and the Museo de Arte Moderno in Bogota, Colombia. Garcia has also published in peer-reviewed journals, including Art Education, the Drama Review, and the Journal of Curriculum and Pedagogy. And we're excited about her new book project that she has a contract on and is currently working very hard to complete her project. And she is an assistant professor in the School of Art and Design and my dear colleague here at UTRGV. Welcome, Christen.
It's nice to see you all. Thank you for coming. I'm going to show an arts-based approach to research. So I'm going to talk about how my visual work has become writing and how there's tensions, but also how they go together. And then in some ways, how they don't. Can I get you to? And as Dr. McAllen said, I'm from the San Diego-Tijuana border. I had lived a large part of my life in the Midwest, particularly Milwaukee and Madison. And I also lived in central Pennsylvania while I was in school, and now I live in South Texas. So I have this life that's mediated by both the borderlands and the Midwestern US. And those are parts of my life that go together, and they also contradict each other at the same time. So some examples of my visual work with the Nationwide Museum Mascot Project. For many years, my partner and I who also teaches at UTRGV, have mascotted art museums all over the place. And it defies some of the clean aesthetic that museums like to emulate. But it's also about going through or pushing against those borders that exist between the museum itself and the public, especially the communities that are surrounding the museums, which oftentimes museums don't serve the communities that live within their spaces. So that's one project. And then my second or solo body work that is collaborative is about food and how food can talk about hybridity, Nepantla, borderlands identities. And I just realized today that these tortillas that I made are like the same color scheme as the mascots, and I had never made that connection. But again, like two very different things, but ultimately that talk about borderlands existence and the idea of living in between worlds. And so then at a certain point, after operating more as a studio artist, I was forced to write when I went back for my PhD in art education, because I have an MFA in studio art. And so all of a sudden, instead of answering to galleries and museums, I was told to answer to publications. And in a way, I felt like I was forced to write, and I was very resistant to it. And I remember telling my advisors, like, I'm an artist. I don't write things. I write an artist statement, and let me do visual work. And so I fought it. And then eventually, through the process of having to write a dissertation, I was able to embrace both. And some ways that I have is talking or using the image, the act of making, and the image itself to theorize, to come up with new ideas, to talk about things. And so it can be more traditional academic writing, but then also image, and then a mix of both. And here's some book projects that have dealt with those issues. And I mean, throughout the years, you can just click. So in terms of research, it's good to start out with a question. And a central question that I've had for a while, and some things have changed, but it's ultimately like, how do Chicana, Latina theories, or what do they offer art practice and teaching? And to me, art practice and teaching are inseparable. I see them together in a way it's hard to separate both for me. And then also, how can art practice and writing merge, or how does that merge, or what does it look like when they go together? Go next. And then some things that I've been working on with my colleague, and this has to do with a book project that we're working on with Routledge, is working on this theoretical framework. So using theories and ideas by Lorian Sadua, Nepantla, the Nahuatl word of living in between or existing in between worlds, autohistoria teoria, so using your personal lived experiences to theorize and not necessarily looking to somebody else's ideas in a book 100 years ago to theorize, but how we can do that in the present. And also curadora is something that Ansaldúa and also Keating talk about in terms of curadora as healer or facilitator of the healing process. So these are some things that we're looking into to answer some of these questions. And you can go. So that's funny how it got separated. Our methodology that we're working on is called Nepantlando. So it's like, right, Nepantla, which is a Nahuatl word, and then putting it with the Spanish gerund, right, the ing, like Nepantlaing. So what does it mean, aside from like talking about this idea of living in between worlds, which in my own experience, it's living in between the US and Mexico, but also living in between the Midwest and the borderlands as well, in my experience living in the US. And so this methodology or way in which we're kind of looking to answer these questions, we talk about like shifting ideology into action. So instead of just ideas and thinking and talking, it's like, how can we do this? It's also a doing of living in between worlds instead of just talking about living in between worlds. And it's also, we talk about where art and teaching are inseparable. So that's an important piece in it. And a method or way in which one way right now, we're trying to answer these questions that we have about like how these theories inform art practice is something that we call a visual plática. It's a performative act using text and image to share lived experiences. And we also call it performative visual art and studio writing. So again, it's that the merging of the two. And this was done by an alum, Alexis Ramos. She's an MFA alum. And she always talked about her family's relationship at dinner time. And these are just some statements and conversations that would be yelled across about frijoles and other things. So again, sharing lived experience. You can really fast. These are some examples of more the visual side of it. So some tortilla experiments. I'll pass around some stuff too. This is from a journal called Chiriku up top. And then there's a couple other examples. I pull more of the image pages out of those. And then also this piece is, and oftentimes I write with students because some of these things come out of classes. So even if we have certain frameworks and something comes out of an assignment, like a mobile museum that talks about Nepantla, this is a student example. And this article talks about that and how teachers can use that in the classroom to work with. So here's one of the edited books that we worked on that it's all about lived experiences and also testimonio, sharing your story. And you can go ahead. And this is the most recent one, and it's blank because we're working on the book and there isn't a cover yet. But my colleague and I, Leslie Sotomayor, are working on with that Nepantla methodology, ways in which we can answer these questions, like what does it mean when some of these ideas have a conversation with art practice? What does it mean when art making merges with living in between worlds like Nepantla? Or what does it mean to theorize using images in more of an Ansaldúa sense? So that's it for me. And I'll pass around some books too, if you just want to take a look at some ways in which the image and text merge. It was hard to show it online. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And our third speaker is Teresita Lozano. Teresita is also one of our colleagues here at UTRGV. She's an assistant professor of musicology and ethnomusicology in the School of Music. She's a native of the US-Mexico border as well. She engages in research that explores the relationship between music, migration, religion, and identity, and a passionate advocate for music and community activism. She has served as part of collaborative arts projects in public education and immigrants' rights movements. And prior to her position at UTRGV, she served as a postdoctoral fellow in ethnomusicology at West Virginia University. And she was previously awarded the Charlotte Newcomb Doctoral Dissertation Fellowship Award, or Fellowship. And she is also an alumna of the Latino Museum Studies Program Graduate Fellowship at the Smithsonian Institution. And she holds a BME from Baylor University and a PhD in ethnomusicology from the University of Colorado Boulder. So thank you, Teresita, for coming.
Hello. Okay. All right, here we go. So I know that there's going to be a couple of things up here, but I apologize about that. So I had some questions here just to pose to each of you so that you can have some background when I go into talking about my own experiences and my own research. So as Dr. McAllen introduced about me, I also grew up on the border, but I grew up on a different border. It's also the US-Mexico, but in West Texas. So I grew up in El Paso and going back and forth between El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. And I didn't really understand that I actually lived on the US part until I started kindergarten and I learned the Pledge of Allegiance and the national anthem, because I didn't grow up speaking English in my home. I learned English through Mr. Rogers, Sesame Street, Disney, and going to a bilingual pre-K and then bilingual kindergarten. And it's there when they showed us the American flag that I understood that when we cross El Puente, the bridge, we're actually going to a different place. And that's my first awareness that was a border. To me, it was just, I hated waiting in line in the bridge because it takes ages to get back. It was loud. It smelled like gasoline. I'm surprised that I didn't get carbon monoxide poisoning, waiting out there for that long. But it was my first realization because as soon as I would cross back into the border, I learned how to say American. Because once you actually get there, if you roll down the window and they ask you, are you an American citizen? And at that point, my parents were not, but I was. And so I would pop my head from the back as a little kid and say, American. And then I would turn to my dad and say, ¿Verdad, papá? ¿Verdad, American? Asking for his confirmation that to tell the customs enforcement that I was indeed American. And that was my entry point back into the United States part of the border. And so I'm glad that, with what Dr. Hubbs and what Dr. Garcia have been talking about personal experience and what it means to do research and these combinations of how we even come up with ideas for research to begin with. And some of my ideas for research, including my dissertation and current projects that I have, really stem from the work that I do, my reflections on my own identity. I know that some of my students are here and they know that one of the first things that I ask my students to do every semester, regardless of whether they're graduate students or undergrads, is to write a music identity essay, to actually reflect on who they are, what they listen to, what their cultural background is, how they perceive music. And it's through these interests that they're able to see how they can actually start within close to homeness, meaning starting out with something that you're familiar with, but then recognizing that even if you do research on your own culture, you are also an outsider. Because now you are talking about other people's perspectives, getting other people's viewpoints on the same musical culture, the same phenomenon or anything that you're studying, the same art that you experience, but you experience it in a very unique way. And you can contribute your own experiences, but you also have to be open to the fact that there are other viewpoints. And sometimes they actually conflict with what you might see. And it's often something very important for us to recognize and to understand these individual experiences, potential biases, positionality, which I know Hector has heard this a million times. So, realizing that you may not always agree with the perspectives of your interlocutors. Interlocutors are people who you interview, people that you talk to, people who inform you of different things. And I use the metaphor of what is authentic Mexican food. No offense to the Valley, but my favorite tamales are definitely not the tamales in the Valley. I love tamales from the border with Chihuahua. And to me, that is authentic tamales. But I can agree that to somebody who's lived their whole life on the eastern part of northern Mexico and in the Valley, they may have a very different idea of what tamales are. And then if you go to Oaxaca, they will have a completely different idea of what tamales are, and they have their own viewpoint of what is authentic. And we come from, I guess, a similar culture, being Mexican, Mexican-American, but with these different viewpoints. I'm also hungry, so that's like my metaphor right now. So, what are the ethical considerations that we need to take when talking to our interlocutors? This is another thing that's important. I am one of the lightest people in my family. I am perceived and can present myself as a white passing Mexican. And in my world of doing research, I am treated in a different way than some of the members of my own family. But then, speaking of borders, as I cross into the border of people having more information about me, knowing that my name is Teresita Jesus Lozano Campos Valenzuela Lowenberg, like this long name, that I have a very, very, Mexican name. I have, there are indicators about me. I am not a native English speaker, but I learned how to speak English. And on paper, I am perceived in a certain way that I am not perceived when somebody looks at me. Knowing this and knowing that there are other fellow Latina and Latine folks who do the same research that are perceived in a very different way, including my own interlocutors who may feel uncomfortable because I went to university. I am a first-generation American, but I have a doctorate. This is something that can make certain people in the community that I talk to feel intimidated. I am a white presenting Mexican. I have, certain privileges that even though I don't come from wealth, to them, they perceive it in a certain way, might make them feel uncomfortable. And the other way around too, when I do work by myself in certain areas of Mexico, that can be dangerous as a woman, as someone who, even though I have dual nationality, I am Mexican and American. When I'm traveling, I am very American in certain ways. I mean, my tias remind me every day of the way that I dress, like they can pinpoint me and say like, that person is from the US. I think it's my chacos. I need to like change them. But being aware of the vulnerability that you have in doing your research and also realizing that your interlocutors are also vulnerable. So the last thing that I want to talk about before I give you some examples of my own research is some of the obstacles that were met when conducting research when nobody's done the research that you are doing right now. So let's, we've talked about, who was it, Hector? One of our students wanted to do something on Hawaiian music and connections to some protest movements about a certain time in Hawaiian history, but couldn't find any resources. And I said, well, let's look at some of the parallels in other cultures or other research. Don't be afraid to draw from other scholars or other case studies, meaning other, phenomenon that people have been researching that are similar to what you're doing, but not exactly the same. And you can actually apply those perspectives to the work that you're doing. And it's an excellent segue into my dissertation work that I wanted to show you. And these are just like some slides from, when I presented this on at a conference. So I talk about something called ghost smuggling ballads, or I research. These are corridos that are written by undocumented migrants, already a vulnerable community, right? That experience paranormal apparitions in the desert by ghosts from this revolution in Mexico called La Cristiada from the 1920s, right after the Mexican Revolution. And these ghosts, according to these migrants, intercede for them, help them cross the border as these paranormal coyotes. And they write these corridos to document their migrant experience. Nobody has written about this when I was doing my dissertation. I had to draw on so much other scholarship and writings about maybe the ghosts themselves, but nobody was talking about the music. And still, I'm kind of by myself. So it can be very lonely in that sense. But
You've got the ghosts to keep you company.
I do have the ghosts to keep me company. And people have asked me if I've had my own experiences, and that's a different story. So I just, want to tell you about like the fact that this is a very unique research in that sense that nobody's really talked about it. And I'm still conducting this and working on, hopefully writing a book in the next couple of years about this research. But the other side of it with personal experience is that, and this is what I want to end on, is how research can sometimes intersect with activism. I am very open with my students about the immigrant rights activism that I do outside of my academic work, but it also connects to my academic work. When I was a grad student, I was part of this performing monologue, theater, musical theater. I was the only person providing the music, but it was called Salsa Loteria, and it was about immigrant women. And I utilized autohistoria, I utilized testimonio, I utilized, my own experiences as the daughter of immigrants, the first gen American, but who had also had members of my own family who were undocumented. And I provided music for this particular performance, which I would love to, share more about. But, in the interest of time, I just want to kind of draw upon the fact that I drew on my own experiences with my abuelita. This is Jesucita. She passed away when I was in high school, but everything that I inherited from her was part of my experience that really inspired me to join this and inspired me to be part of, a convivencia, also plática, using these different types of theories of Latinidad, being a Latina, in order to utilize a song, Adios Mariquita Linda, which some of you may be familiar with. I see Juan is here. I don't know if he's familiar with this song, this older song, and using what I refer to as resignification, changing the meaning of it and applying it to both my research and activism. But this began as activism. This is what I was doing on my very little free time that I had in grad school. And then a few years later, I'm writing about it and sharing it with you all. So you never know where your research is going to be inspired from, even years later. I mean, Dr. Amado and I talk about things of just like, I remember a couple of years I was like really interested in doing this and I really need to revisit it. So it's always okay to have a book of ideas that you will leave for later, but write it down because you will forget. And I know this because it happens to me. But anyways, thank you so much. So I just wanted to end there.
Great. And we thought we would take the last minutes of the roundtable hour just to engage with our students and our audience, any students in the chat on Zoom. If you'd like to send a question in, we'd love to answer any questions. And yes, Andres.
I have a question perhaps to get us started. I thank you all for your fantastic presentations and very inspiring. When we do research in the arts, we are confronted sometimes with a problem that researchers in other fields don't deal with as much, which is the medium itself. When we deal with sound, for example, or we deal with images, the way to disseminate that or to share that is just as important a consideration as the subject we're researching. And so I was wondering if you can tell us about your experience, sharing this research, because it's very different to write about a visual image or write about a sound as opposed to experiencing it. So.
Who wants to start?
She started.
Sure. Well, that's a great question, Andres, and I'm sure it comes. You and I both work on music and sound, and when you are writing an article or publishing a book, or even writing, say, for a magazine, it's too sad and too frustrating to think, oh, I'm going to write an entire piece about this song, and maybe somebody is reading it without ever even listening to the song, right? And so they won't get any of my great points. They won't get my punchlines, if they don't actually listen. And so far, the solutions we have to that sort of thing, like when I publish this book, I want my publisher also to publish a website that will link to sounds, that will have like photographs of the Valley, and some of the people I talk with, my interlocutors. But books are not ideal to our artistic mediums. But they're still an important way to get our ideas around, especially in academic writing. This is one of the reasons that I'm really glad to also do public-facing work, to write for blogs and websites, and I speak a lot with reporters and media folk because they can link. And when I wrote the op-ed about the Jason Aldean song, not to praise that song, it was a critical op-ed, but one of the embedded videos was a TikTok by Destiny Stark. So there were videos, there were YouTube music. Unfortunately, there was the Aldean music video starting right at the beginning. But you can do that sort of thing now in online writing and work, right? And share your research with the sounds and the images. And that's really important. And my university doesn't care at all, right? You can't get tenure on it. You need the book and the articles, right? But that should change. If some of you are thinking about that kind of career, that should change in future years.
And I just want to add to that. Is that okay? Sorry. Yeah. So I actually, with my graduate students, shared the Musicology Now version of your essay and asked, is it useful to you to have these embedded videos and links to other resources? Because think about the way we engage with internet sources in general. And the way that I compared it to, and I was talking with Dr. Hubbs at lunchtime, is how many of you all listen to true crime podcasts or YouTube channels on YouTube and TikTok?
Yeah, do raise your hand.
I'm not going to judge you. Okay, because I do that too. Okay, that's research. It's public sector research. And sometimes they say, I've linked other videos in the description, they ask you to stitch people on TikTok, all of these things. That's a way to engage with multimedia interface. And I wish that, and it's something that we can work together to change the culture of allowing multimedia works to count toward tenure, to count toward, public sector work, to count as academic work, because it is. And I've always joked in some of my classes of, I really want to start, a YouTube channel where I have just like shorter videos of what I want to share with people and get more views. And I would, of course, ask you to subscribe and support me. But, but it makes me wonder, that it's really useful, because when you're reading a book, and I work with YouTube as an interface for my research, all those corridos I told you about, the ghost smuggling ballads, they only exist on YouTube. So people who are going to read my book are going to have to find a way to get the YouTube links. I'm going to have to figure out a way to do that. So it's something to think about.
You
The musical
can
part.
include links in the footnotes, but that's not very helpful.
No, unless you're reading it as a PDF, like you're not going to be able to actually go to that. And, with visual art, I don't like, you can have images in the book at least, but what if it's the texture? What if it's something else that you're talking about? Oh, sorry. QR codes. Yes. Which is how I take attendance in my class, by the way.
I had not thought of that though, because we never do it in books and articles.
No.
And it didn't occur to me. Maybe that's what we need to do.
QR codes. That's awesome. I love that. But I didn't know if you want to add something. Huh?
Well, the
Did they hit the
whole
link?
PDF thing.
Oh yeah, they did.
In my doctoral program, it was the status quo to give our committee a printed book of our dissertation draft. And I had to argue why I couldn't do that, because I had video in my dissertation and also, a whole image essay too. And because of that, they allowed me to submit a PDF as their review copy, but they were very strict about that. But I had to fight it just for a video. And there's actually, in at least one of those publications, there's a video file, but there's no way the journal had the capability to do a video. It's printed in the book, it's online, but there's nothing that they can go to play the video. So, I mean, that's a big issue. And especially in terms of publications, oftentimes, and I think it's changing, but online journals are not always looked upon as positively or as well as the print, the ones that have the online copies, but also the print copies. And that's another way, I think, to get into that. But then again, it's always like, I think of like WWAT, what would Abuela think? And I mean, I think about that, or I feel like I use her as a barometer. Like, would she understand this? Would she just tell me I'm not making any sense? And I oftentimes think about that too, is like, am I getting caught up in my own little world, and fewer and fewer people have access to that? And then if I am, how do I back out and then go somewhere else? But it's not an easy question, especially because of exhibition is a way to get work out there in a way better, and I think in a great way, better than a book that has art in it. But again, now that I shifted from studio to art education in terms of what I belong in or my category academically, I'm supposed to write. So it's, there's a lot of I think to me, there's always a lot of tensions and contradictions that exist within all of this.
But QR codes, that's a really great suggestion.
I like that.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is, of course, that links, that URLs change over time, and then you get dead links, but
it's going to be around for a long time.
the QR code itself, but like YouTube videos,
Yeah, they can change or get deleted.
yeah.
So it would have to be housed somewhere within the publisher. So it would
Or
be,
the DOI,
yeah, or
or
the
to link to the DOI.
yeah. It's a lot there.
But still, that's a great suggestion. I'm really glad you asked that tough question, Andres.
Yeah, really good question.
Other questions or thoughts? Yes, Ed?
I was impressed by the comments about that you were making about sometimes you find connections in otherwise not understood or not programmed kind of ways. I lived in Southern California for many years, and I used to hang out with a lot of the landscape folks who, be on the university, and we would just hang out. And of course, we drank a lot of beer as well. But on Friday afternoons, we'd all just kind of get together and hang out in the back of my truck. And at that time, I had been in New Orleans, and I was playing a lot of Zydeco music, which is in French. And the gentlemen who would hang out with me, they loved it. And they were Mexican American. They spoke Spanish as the primary language. They spoke to me in English because my Spanish is pretty poor. But when they spoke to each other, they always spoke Spanish. And there was a connection. And after a while, as you were talking, I was thinking, what was that connection? And it wasn't the language, it wasn't the culture, because they were very different. It was the instrument. And it was primarily the accordion and the way that the accordion was played. And if you look at video of like Christen a Zydeco accordion artist, and the young lady who's going to play tomorrow, or any kind of conjunto or Tejano accordion, you'll see very similar, real strong similarities in the way the accordion is played, the strike of the tone, the rhythm, and that's where we made a connection. We made a connection through the sound and through the instruments and the way they were being played. That was our connection. That's what connected us. Of course, a lot of beers, but great fun. We had a great time, and very desperate kind of people in a very desperate situation. But the music and how the music was played was what connected us. And so I think it's a good example of sometimes connections that you don't see. They're very different, but there's a connection times when we work on our research, being open to that possibility.
I love that. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And it makes me think a lot of discussions with my graduate students of finding those connections, because we were talking about that yesterday with trying to answer some of the questions that Dr. Hubbs had posed about what are the Mexican roots or connections with country music. So it's really interesting.
I just had I guess, I don't know if it's a comment or even a question, but just, I overheard earlier being said about you, Dr. Hubbs, that you do research or that you also look into queer country music. And as a gay person myself, it's very hard to find any sort of, you do have to do a lot of research when it comes to looking into queer country music, or mostly any kind of queer music, but mainly, I feel like mainly queer country music or even Mexican music, if it's, I don't even know if it exists right now or anything. I was born in McAllen, but I lived most of my life in Corpus Christi. And then I came back 3 years ago to live in McAllen and started school at SBC and came over here for my BFA in art education. And I've gotten more into Hispanic music, country music, all that being over here more than I was over in Corpus. It's a lot of R&B, rap. That's what you're gonna get a lot more over there. And a lot of Lozano kids. no Sabo kids, I'm sorry. And
No Sabo kids, I'm so sorry. I taught Dr. Amala what a no Sabo kid was.
over here, I saw on one of your pieces for a student, I believe, up on the screen, that there was something about it was different little sayings that I was reading up there, and it was saying like practice your Spanish, or like if you don't know Spanish, like disappointment. My Spanish is somewhat broken, but I completely understand it 100%. I can speak it, it's just not beautiful. It's not very correct. But what I was gonna say earlier about the queer country music and even trying to look for Spanish music, the research that I try to do a lot on, I love to read, so I try looking for LGBT lesbian books are very hard to find. It's now up until maybe last year that it's been more popular to find it through TikTok mainly. That's my only resource so far to be able to even find books like that. And I have found some country artists through TikTok that are queer or lesbian or gay men or even for other kinds of music. And as you said, for research, that was the only source I could really find to really find anything like that. Because like you're not gonna really come across it unless it's shared for me, unless I really look through Google and go into, like what you said, a deep dive. It's so difficult.
But someone has done the deep dive,
Yes.
and they share it on TikTok,
Yes.
and you get the benefits of their research.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Like they do like hashtag lesbian book talk, and you can they have literal recommendations of like 50 books, and I'm just like, wow, I didn't have to
Yeah, thank you.
even go on Google or anything. And it's becoming more apparent that it's like starting to be more accepted. Like just recently in the McAllen Barnes and Noble found that they just put a tiny little lesbian book area and then a giant gay male area just recently. But it's getting there, like coming through.
I was gonna say, if you need recommendations for lesbian film, like film talk.
Oh, I just come across that.
Yeah, I have a favorite TikToker who talks about all of that. Mostly I got into it because one of my favorite books is Fried Green Tomatoes, which is amazing. If you haven't read it already, that it was a recommendation of mine to
There
you.
have been some movies that people who they say they're like the OG lesbian and they're like, oh, how have you not seen this movie? Or how have you not read this book? And I'm like, well, growing up, I had to keep it all a secret. So can't really find out too much when you're younger. And then
Not to mention that the whole world's keeping it a secret and you have to look so hard to find it.
yeah. So now that it's become a lot of younger people born in the 2000s. I was not born in the 2000s, okay. They are more with the times right now and like more accepted, but back then it wasn't very much accepted. I live in a very Mexican Catholic household, so as I think anybody who can relate can understand that that's a big deal to me. I've come a long way, pretty much.
And TikTok helps you.
Yes, and I wanted to say how I found it so interesting, all the things that you do and that you get to do and that you spread awareness of or that you share with the world. I think that's very interesting.
I'm the luckiest person, right? How fun does that job sound? My job in the combination, and the thing is, I've been able to bring together these things that they're of interest to me, and they haven't been brought together in other places, but I get to make it my job.
I didn't even know that could be a job to say.
Nobody knew, and then I tried it out.
Awesome. Well, we want to thank Dr. Hubbs for speaking tonight and also helping us learn so much and expand paradigms and continue research. So please join us tomorrow for her lecture at 6. Country music as Mexican American music, and for the performance by the Texas Sweethearts at 4. And in between the 4 and 6 o'clock events, we'd love for y'all to just come upstairs and enjoy some refreshments and talk and visit and share your stories more. So we hope you'll join us again tomorrow. And thank you so much, Dr. Hubbs, and thank you, Teresita. Yes, did you have something to say?
Yeah, the performance is going to be here on the first floor tomorrow.
Yes, the performance will be outside, right here at the library foyer, right outside the doors by the cafe to the coffee shop.
Okay.
So it'll be danceable. I wonder if anyone will dance.
Yeah, could
It should. I mean, that music, it's conjunto and country. It's going to be totally danceable with accordion.
Yes, absolutely. And anyone else who wants to play, please come and bring your instruments, and we'd love to invite you to play, and anyone online. So we look forward to continuing the conversations, and thank you all both so much, Teresita and Christen.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to Andres Amato for helping be the the inspiration behind us all and keeping us on task